well, I felt the earthquake, and it was the first major earthquake I'd ever felt in my life. And it was rolling, and it felt like it was going on forever, but I hear it was only like 12 seconds. And it was my day off from UPI. And so I immediately turned on the television, and I saw David Horowitz on KNBC, and he was broadcasting from the parking lot. And of course, there were no details of the quake then. The reports were just starting to come in. And so one of the reports was that there were bubbles rising from the ocean off Malibu. And so I said, wow, this is interesting. I think I'll call it into the UPI Bureau. And I called it in, and they said, forget about the bubbles. Get up to the Van Orman Dam right now. It's about to collapse. So I've got a VW van, and I have the back seats taken out. And so I can work there, and I can also sleep there. And I don't know how I got up there because of all the problems with the roads. But I found the command center, and that's where I would be for the next 2 days. And so I would be waiting there for the latest reports on the situation with the dam. And what had happened is the quake knocked out the top 30 feet of the dam, including the concrete face and the road along the top. And the water level was left at 6 feet above. And of course, they were trying to drain it as quickly as possible before another major aftershock came through. And it was very lucky because the dam was only half full at the time. There was a later UCLA report that if the dam had collapsed and flooded the valley, that 71,000 people to 123,000 people could have died. And so they had sent first voluntary evacuation orders to the 80,000 people who lived in the valley below. And then police were noticing that some people were going back in. So they made that order mandatory. And Nixon had declared a disaster area for California. And Reagan decided to come down. Police Chief Davis had asked for, I think, 30,000 National Guardsmen, but Reagan rejected that. So Reagan came, and he flew over the Olive View Hospital, and that hospital was brand new. It had just opened, and an entire wing had just fallen over. And Reagan had said it looked like a child's plaything just lying there. And he also toured the VA hospital. But that evening, UPI asked me to go down into the neighborhoods below that were evacuated and talk to the people who wouldn't leave their homes. And there was supposed to be a projected time, I think about 6 p.m., when they thought there would be an aftershock and the bridge and the dam could collapse. So I interviewed a few families. I didn't see any children, but they were mostly older homeowners that for some reason just didn't want to leave their house. You know, you can understand during a brush fire, people staying with their homes perhaps to hose it down, but I don't understand in a flood how that could help. But so I slept in the van that first night, and then stayed at the command post again the next day. And then there had been a report that there had been this miraculous survivor at the VA hospital. And of course, the VA, it had been built in 1926 as a tuberculosis hospital. And it was called the Garden Center of the entire VA system. But most of the buildings, there were like 26 that were built before the big earthquake in 1933. And there were no earthquake standards then. Most of those suffered damage, and 4 completely collapsed. And one, the survivor, Frank Carbonera, who was 68 years old, a dietary chef working in the kitchen. And he had the presence of mind to grab a large metal sink, somehow put it over his head. And 58 hours, he was buried under up to 10 feet of rubble. And one of the rescuers says, "We've got a live one." And Frank His first words were "hi," and they took him by helicopter to Harbor General Hospital of Torrance, and that's where they sent me to cover a news conference that was going to be his family and him. And we got down there, and his wife Rose was there, and two daughters. And the daughters had said they had given up all hope for his survival, but his wife always believed that he would live because of prayers. And Frank said that when he was down there, buried for all that time, he was alone. Nobody else was around him, that he felt like he was dead, but that prayers pulled him through. And he suffered only a broken wrist and a couple of ribs. And the doctor said he looked like he'd only been down there 1 hour instead of 58.
It kind of strikes me, talking about some of the people that you went into the neighborhood and people that wouldn't leave their homes. It kind of strikes me the mask situation today, the people who won't wear a mask. Did you kind of relate that to that?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't leave their homes when this collapse could be imminent. I mean, a big aftershock could have very well, And as I said, they're very lucky that the dam was only half full at the time. And they worked like 4 days to pump out all the water they could into a sister reservoir and into the Los Angeles River. And we were finally able to do that.
When you look down on that dam, what were your thoughts?
My thoughts are we just, one more big shake, could just, that thing could collapse, because you can see that all the damage that had been done to the wall up there. And so it's just amazing that they were able to save it.
I look at reporting then, I look at reporting now, and it's the same basic skills. Technology's different. And we didn't have cell phones back then. A lot of the phones were out, and Somar was all out. I don't know. So
San Fernando was completely cut off.
So how did you file?
By telephone. I mean, the telephones, I guess the pay phones were working. I was able to find, and that was the only way I was filing, which is very interesting, because today you're in instant communication with everybody. In those days, if you wanted somebody not to find you, for example, I was posted overseas for many years, and if I was off in Afghanistan covering the war, I would be away for like a week incommunicado with people. Whereas today, you'd be in constant communication.
When I'll talk about a little bit about that, because it's so different. I mean, I was covering stuff at the same time. I've been going to people's houses to file after a trial.
Yeah, exactly. I covered the air disaster in '78 in San Diego, the PSA mid-air collision, and I would file from people's houses.
Yeah, I covered the Aeromexico crash. That was my first big one for UPI, and the same thing. And I find the neighborhood. I mean, I remember knocking on doors because I covered the Jaja trial, which is one of the most fun stories to ever cover.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite stories. But when the verdict came down, we didn't have any cell phones. We didn't have cell phones yet. We didn't have the big ones yet. I literally went door to door, knocking on people's doors. Can I use your phone? Can I use your phone? Can I use your phone? Yeah. You always have to separate yourself, if a reporter, from being the human person who. How did you do that?
Well, in the prime example probably was the San Diego air crash, where bodies just rained in the neighborhood, and it was awful. I just had to act as a reporter and hold back my emotions, and then later when I went home that night, maybe I would, cry or something, show my emotions then. But just, your reactions as a reporter is to get, just get the story.
Yeah.
And you any way you can, and then show your emotions later. After.
You had to spend 2 days in your van covering Somar. So really, you were kind of feeling the same thing that people in Sylmar and San Fernando were feeling because they had no running water, they had no beds,
Yeah.
they had to sleep outside. So you were actually a part of the story at that point.
I probably, yeah. I've been part of more stories than that too. Like in the 1970, the year before, I was arrested during the Isla Vista riots and held incommunicado and Reagan called for a complete investigation into my arrest. So I was lucky I was captured by the good guys. And I was interviewed on the George Putnam show. And then in 1973, somehow I was credited with discovering traces of the lost continent of Atlantis with 2 other divers in southern Spain. And so, I had to, we found something, but it wasn't Atlantis. And
Right.
that became the story. And so, yeah, somehow I just found myself being in the middle of some of these things.
When you look back on Sylmar, a lot of lessons were learned from Sylmar. The CERT program for fire came out of it. Actually, search and rescue became a thing from there, because when you went in, what was your reaction to the response of the first responders? A lot of those first responders are telling me they weren't prepared. It was especially firefighters said the idea was during an earthquake like that at that time, get out of the station and then wait for somebody to tell you what to do and then respond. What was your the first responders that were there and the rescue efforts? How did that impress you one way or the other?
Well, I mean, this was the first major earthquake that anybody had ever seen, so it was like brand new to everybody, and there was just destruction all around. No first responder could be prepared for what was going on. So I guess, I just, it greatly admired them for being able just to do anything with that they could, and they did a great job. Considering what was going on, they were sort of learning as it was going on how to take care of people and how to, maneuver through things.
When you look back on your experience and being a reporter myself, I know we process things differently than most people when it comes to disasters and what happens afterwards, whether you're in an earthquake or whether you get beat up or whatever, arrested or whatever. How have you had any issues, or have you thought about any issues that stem from your first major quake? We've had some people say, I've got, years later, I couldn't fly for a long time, or I couldn't stand the smell of ketchup because, there was ketchup all over my kitchen floor or whatever. Was there anything that you have faced since that time?
Well, I think I've been able to sort of divorce myself from seeing things in a disaster from my regular life. So they really haven't affected me that much. Of course, when you see somebody die, or during the Manson family slayings, they sent me out every time there was a slaying in LA to see if this was another victim of the Manson trial. So I saw a lot of bodies, and you never get used to it, but you just have to divorce yourself from, that kind of thing from your regular life. Yeah, it was interesting that after I was in the Los Angeles Bureau for 9.5 years, I went to San Diego as bureau chief. And then I got a chance to go overseas to Hong Kong, which was a brand new experience for me. And then our man dropped dead in New Delhi, India. So I was bureau chief there for 3.5 years, and got to cover we interviewed Indira Gandhi, her last interview before she was assassinated by her bodyguards. And I got to interview the Dalai Lama up in his foothills home in the Himalayas, and then went to Sydney, Australia, and covered South Pacific and New Zealand, and then was asked to be bureau chief in North Asia, based in Tokyo. So I got to go there, and we covered the death of Hirohito, and so and I met my wife, who was Chinese, in Tokyo. And we've got a 26-year-old daughter now who's going to CSUN